Hello and welcome to today's training industry webinar. CLOs aren't born, they're built. What it really takes to reach the executive L&D level. So I'm Liz Spate, the events marketing specialist here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Before we get started though, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speakers and get the most out of today's program. So if you haven't already, please pull up those chat windows and let us know where you're joining us from today. And while you're doing that, you can use this window to interact with our speakers with any comments. As for questions, though, please use that Q&A section in your toolbar below. It honestly helps us keep us organized and make sure we address all your questions. So we will be addressing those questions at the end of the program, but you can plug those questions throughout this session. We would also love to hear about what you learned from today's session on social media. So please follow us on any platform of your choice and hashtag TI webinars as you share your favorite takeaways with your colleagues. And when this webinar ends, you should receive a short evaluation survey. We always welcome your feedback on things like the content, speakers, topics, or anything else you would like to share with us. So be sure to complete that survey after the event. And as always, today's webinar will be recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com, and you'll receive a follow-up email from us that will include the link to the on-demand program for you to share with your team. If you've attended one of our programs in the past, thank you so much for joining us again. And if this is your first webinar with us, welcome. At Training Industry, we offer dozens of webinars with subjects ranging from AI to analytics to onboarding, upskilling, and reskilling. We cover about every topic relevant to leaders of training organizations around the globe. And now it is my pleasure to welcome our moderator for today's event. Dr. Amy DuVernet is an accomplished industrial organizational psychologist recognized for her expertise in talent assessment, development, and organizational effectiveness. And with that, Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Liz. So excited to be here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So hello and welcome. Very excited to be here to talk to you all about this very important topic. I know many of us aspire to the highest level in the L&D function, and today we're going to learn a little bit more about what it really takes to get to that level. So as Liz said, I am Amy DuVernet. I am the Vice President of Learning Products at Training Industry, which means that I run our courses team. I oversee all of the processes related to the development and delivery of our certificates and certifications for learning professionals, including our Certified Professional and Training Management program. I also have some of the pieces that we'll talk about today in my job role as well, including oversight of marketing and sales and budget responsibility. I am so excited and thrilled to be joined by such great expertise in our panelists. First, we have Dr. Kristal Walker, who is the Vice President of Employee Wellbeing at Sweetwater. She is formerly the Senior Vice President of HR at Sweetwater. She's going to tell us a lot more about her career later, but I just want to say thank you, Dr. Walker, for being here today. And also thrilled to have Ann Stott here. Ann is the former Vice President, Chief Talent and Learning Officer at Biogen. She's also the former Vice President of Strategic Accounts at PDG. And thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Great. So quick agenda for everyone today. First, we're going to level set. What is a CLO? We're going to talk a little bit about some training industry research to have a better understanding of what this executive level position looks like across the industry. So I'll handle the first part and present some statistics to you guys. Next, we're going to move to a panel discussion, and we're going to spend most of our time on the panel discussion today. We're going to hear from Dr. Walker and Ann on their career path, their critical skills, the context that helped lead them to that executive level position. We're also going to get some advice from them. If this is something we aspire to get to, what do we need to do to get there? And then finally, we're going to save at least 10 minutes at the end so that you all can ask your own questions and hear from both Ann and Dr. Walker in terms of answering those burning questions that you have about getting to that executive level. Before I move to the next slide, I would love to invite you to chat in what's one thing that you're hoping to learn today. This will help shape our panel discussion. So please do let us know something that you're hoping to get out of today's session that you'd like us to cover. So this brings us to our first poll. Just to get a feel for who's in the room, would love for you to answer what best describes your current role. Are you a facilitator, a training specialist? Maybe you're a training manager, senior L&D manager, director, or maybe you already are at that executive level role and you're here to learn more about your current role. If we didn't capture that, what your current role is, go ahead and tell us in the chat. We'd love to hear anything that we kind of missed.
Perfect. I'm going to give everybody about 10 more seconds.
I see in the chat, yes, we have departments of one, right? So we fill all of those roles. I appreciate the difficulty and complexity of that. So thank you for sharing. Okay, so it looks like the bulk of us here are either sitting in the training specialist or training management role, although we do have some of those executive level L&D professionals in the room as well. So thank you all for joining us and really appreciate you joining and bringing any questions that you have. If you have attended a presentation with me in the past, you have probably seen this model. Also, if you've earned your CPTM, you are very familiar with this model. This is our training process framework. And if you want to learn more about this after today, we do have a wiki that provides a lot more detail on it. But I like to present it when talking about L&D careers because I think, you know, the diversity of roles that we just saw in that poll, you probably can find yourself somewhere in this framework. You can see your piece here. This is a model which tries to provide some structure around the processes that the training function really engages in. So I'm going to go over it briefly. Around the outer rim, we have our administrative processes. These are the pieces of the training function that manage that home base, that administration, that keep it running. So we've got strategic planning in there. We've got material fulfillment, reporting, tuition reimbursement, vendor management. These are all those kind of foundational workhorse pieces. Moving into our green semicircle, we see our content-related processes. This is all of the processes that are related to our content development and maintenance. So it may be developing courses, it may be designing job aids, it could be managing or refreshing, maintaining courses, all of the pieces that really relate to the content. Moving inward one more level, we have all of the processes related to delivery. So how are we getting that content to our learner? And that might be through facilitation. It could be through other kinds of delivery mechanisms. But these are the processes that make sure that our delivery is running smoothly. And then moving in one more step, we have our technology, processes related to the management and maintenance of our technology, our LMSs, our authoring tools, all of those pieces. Now, when we created this model, we made it in this shape for a reason. We call it our orchestra model because we like to envision that there is a leader, right? So this is either your training manager, your director, this could be the CLO, sitting at the kind of top of the model and acting as our conductor, right? So they are in charge of overseeing all of those processes and making sure that they coordinate together, that they are working in a cohesive and collaborative way, that there are no conflicts between processes. This training leader is charged with overseeing everything happening in the training function. So I like to share this model because I think it's a great level set of all of the pieces that that executive level person is going to be looking at and considering when managing their role. Another way to look at the structure of the L&D department is to look at that hierarchical chart. And we do a ton of research here at Training Industry on L&D careers. It's really, really important as we're developing our courses and our other offerings for L&D professionals that we understand the career paths that our L&D professionals are engaging in so that we can really understand the competencies and skills gaps that we can help address. This model is squishy, so it really does depend on your organizational context, whether you have each of these roles represented or maybe some other kind of role represented. But this is kind of the average or the most common format, and I'll walk you through it and talk to you about where pieces are maybe a little bit different across organizations. I did not draw lines to represent who reports into who because, again, that really does depend on the organizational context. But up at the top level, we have our CEO, the person who is charged with running the organization. Often there are going to be many C-level positions that are reporting into the CEO position. Here we're only focused on the ones kind of relevant to L&D. So we have our CHRO and our CLO. Now, when we ask L&D professionals to complete our career research, we also ask them who they report to and who reports into them. So this is kind of taking that data and creating the average. Stepping down a level, we have the vice president of training. There probably is also a vice president of HR here. They're not exactly down a level because depending on the organization, we may see that the vice president of training reports into the CEO and there isn't really a CLO position. And in fact, when we look at what's happening in organizations, these two positions, VP of training and CLO, are pretty synonymous. Even though they have different titles, they tend to have the same level of responsibility and be that kind of highest level L&D professional within the organization. Moving down one more level, we have our director of HR, our director of training. The director of training will often report into either a VP of training or a CLO, although occasionally we do see directors of trainings reporting into the CEO if it is a smaller organization. Included the director of HR here as well, because often we will see training professionals reporting into the director of HR as well. And when we move down one more level, we get to our training manager role. Training managers will often report to one of these levels above, right? So training managers might report into a director of HR or a director of training, but could also report into the VP of training or the CLO level, kind of depending on the organization that we're in. And then finally, here at the bottom, we have our independent contributors. These are folks who don't have personnel responsibilities, so they don't have any direct reports, but they are managing processes or specializing in a specific kind of L&D process. These folks tend to report into the training manager, but there may not be a training manager in a specific organization. And in those cases, they're probably reporting into our director of training or director of HR. Again, does depend on the context and how we define the roles in the organization. For today's webinar, we are going to focus in on the roles right here in this box. So again, depending on the organization that we are in, any one of these kinds of positions might be the highest level L&D position within the organization. And that's really what we're trying to look at, is how do we get to that executive level, highest L&D professional in the organization. This is a person that not only has responsibility for the L&D function and making sure that all of the training processes are aligned and working well together, but they also have a seat at the executive table. They have a voice in terms of setting strategic direction for the organization. Which brings us to our next poll. You guys just looked at a little bit of a hierarchy. I'm curious, we all came here to learn something. What is your career aspiration? Are we aspiring to that higher level position? Maybe we're not sure yet. We want to learn more about it. Would love to understand a little bit more about the career goals of everyone who is attending today. So if you would just go ahead and make a selection here, and we can get to know a little bit more about what we're hoping to achieve.
And again, we'll give about 10 more seconds.
Okay, so we have a good portion that are looking to get at that CLO or executive role, 48%. We have another big portion looking for a director level position, some folks who are hoping to get to the manager level. We do have a little bit of other, and happy where I am. I'm so happy that you are happy where you are. That is exciting to hear. That's really probably the best position to be in. Those who are not sure yet, I really do hope that you'll get a little more clarity about what that executive role is to try to understand if it is a good fit for you. And those who picked other would love to hear what that aspirational goal is in the chat. So this is not dissimilar to what we see in our research. 48% here are aspiring to that CLO role. In our research, we see very similar results. So of the L&D professionals who complete our career research, 50% are aspiring to become a CLO or to achieve that executive level L&D role. Now, when we look at our 250,000 learning and development professionals who have subscribed to training industry newsletters and information, we see that less than 1% actually hold one of those executive level titles. So that's a considerable gap between that aspiration and actual attainment. Again, my hope is that some of what you learned today will help you either make the decision that that is or is not your real aspiration, but also if it is your aspiration, we'll provide you with some of the strategies that can help you get a leg up and move from that 50% closer to that less than 1% who are in that executive level role. So let's do a bit of a reality check. What does it actually mean? So 50% of us aspire to be in that role, but we haven't been in that role. What does it feel like? What does it mean? What are we looking to actually have? Here are our average numbers. This is again from our training industry research. We see that on average, those in that CLO or executive vice president role are bringing in around 150 to 250,000 annually in their base salary. They also all mostly receive performance bonuses as well. On average, they're reporting that they're working more than 40 hours a week. So maybe a little bit more. And we do see when we look at the other types of roles that the folks in these roles are reporting working more per week. On average, they have somewhere between 5 to 8 direct reports. So these are folks reporting directly into them who may also have their own teams that they're managing. They are highly experienced. So individuals who fill this executive level role tend to have at least 15 to 20 years of experience that they bring into the role. Their span of control tends to be for the entire organization. So it's not going to just be leadership development or sales training. They tend to have responsibility for training and development across the entire organization. And these roles do not tend to occur in organizations with less than 1,000 employees. So generally speaking, the organization is going to need to be a little bit larger for there to be a CLO or executive level position available. So that's CLO by the numbers. But what are the expectations of that executive L&D professional? Well, first, there's an expectation that they have an executive presence and communication, that they are able to drive strategic alignment and influence stakeholders through this executive presence. And certainly when you're in an executive level role, it is going to be important that you exude that executive feel, that your communications and your interactions with your stakeholders and your learners all rise to a certain level of professionalism. They're also expected to be able to develop and lead a high-performing team. They are charged with managing the entire training function, so they need to be able to adapt their learning style, manage performance, foster culture, coach those who are reporting into them, and also take responsibility and accountability for the work of that training function, even if they're not able to kind of micromanage and be in the weeds related to those pieces. They're also expected to be able to align L&D strategies with the broader business goals. So that means that they're really going to need to have a good understanding of what those business goals are and really be able to understand how L&D maps onto and impacts those business goals. There is a financial and business expectation that this person be able to effectively manage budgets, evaluate costs and benefits, and make strategic decisions that are going to maximize the impact of L&D initiatives. And that leads us to our next one. CLOs and executive level L&D professionals are expected to make data-driven decisions, which means that there's a certain level of data acumen and understanding how to interpret the information and data available across the business, but also to be able to take that and marry it with stories and qualitative information that they are getting from their stakeholders, from the other executives that sit at the table, and make those informed decisions. Executive level L&D professionals also must champion organizational innovation and adaptability. So we are not order takers in this role. It is really important that we are proactively looking at how to continue to drive the business forward, that we are understanding all of the challenges across the business and providing solutions proactively. And then finally, there really does need to be this deep understanding of learning and development. And not just now, but an understanding of the future trends that could impact the learning and development within the organization. And I will say that it's not just future training trends, but also future trends that are occurring in the industry that you work in, future trends that may come into the business or the organization that you're working in, and being able to anticipate the impact to the workforce and what L&D will be needed in the future. So how do we prepare for that position? Here we have some of our key experiences and competencies necessary for this position. This is not an exhaustive list, and I think we're going to hear a lot more from Kristal and Ann related to these, but I will cover them briefly. First, cross-functional work is going to be really a critical piece. If you have the opportunity to engage in some cross-functional work, to work with other functions, to get a position in a different kind of business unit, that is going to be a really critical experience that can help prepare you for this role, because it does help you to understand a little bit better the operational aspects that can impact the role of L&D within the business. Budget responsibility, we talked about business and financial acumen being an expectation. Certainly, if you can have experience, get experience volunteering, get experience in your organization, managing a budget, having that experience with a profit and loss statement, how to interpret it, how to plan for costs is going to be a really critical component to preparing for this position. In terms of competencies, we talked about business acumen, executive presence, communication and influence. In fact, I would say that executive presence, communication, and influence are kind of a trifecta of being able to really work across the business. So those are really critical competencies. Strategic thinking and being able to plan ahead and understand priorities, align what you're doing with the business is really critical. Strategic leadership and vision is a key competency for this role, because you do need to be able to motivate your team. You need to be able to communicate and create that strategic vision, not only within the L&D function, but across the organization, to inspire and motivate that continuous learning and that learning culture. And then, like we mentioned, foundational training knowledge is going to be a really great foundation in this role. I would love to hear in the chat, went over some key experiences and competencies as well as expectations. For those who are aspiring to this role, what's one experience or competency that you already have that you feel will help prepare you for this CLO role? And I'm going to give just a minute before I move to the next one. Strategic thinking, love to see that, Nick. Strategic leadership and vision, communication and influence. That's wonderful. Okay, cross-functional work. Well, let me tell you a little bit about one that you might not be thinking about. One of those critical previous experiences that can help you get to that role is having experience in a training manager role. So our research shows that in terms of pathway to the executive level role, training manager is really kind of a linchpin to get there. It's one of those key experiences that help you move into that role. So when we look at training directors, the most common previous job role experience is training manager, right? So 43% of training directors were formerly training managers. When we look at that CLO or VP executive level, we see that the most common previous experience is training director, which we know to get to training director, training manager is really key. But the second most common is training manager, right? So it is really critical that you have some of that management experience before moving into the executive level role. I think it gives you a really nice oversight and understanding of the way that the processes fit together before you're kind of charged with the total responsibility for the training function. With that, we do have one more poll before we open it up to our panelists. So what do you think is your biggest barrier to reach that CLO or executive level role? We put a few kind of possibilities here. If I didn't capture something that you would see as a barrier to reaching that role, please do use the chat to tell us what it is that you kind of see as being a key or a common kind of challenge that you're experiencing that you think might prevent you or might make it more challenging to get there.
I see Jessica's comment about a little bit of all of these. So I'll give everybody about 10 more seconds to pick an answer.
Okay, so it looks like org structure and size, 42% see this as more of an organizational barrier, right? So I'm in an organization that's small or that doesn't have an executive level position already. So how am I going to get there? Am I going to help create that position? Do I need to transition to another organization? Hopefully we can get some answers to those questions. Throughout our panel discussion, but also lack of visibility and sponsorship. And then we do have some folks saying business acumen or leadership experience. Okay, wonderful. Well, I really appreciate hearing those challenges. And like I said, we're going to try to focus in on some of those in the discussion that we have. With that, we are going to open it up to our panelists, and I am going to stop sharing so that we can look at them face to face. Okay, great. So my first question, and I'll ask Ann to respond first. Can you walk us briefly through your career path and tell us how you arrived at that executive level L&D role?
Yes, hard work and sheer luck. Put those two together, being in the right place at the right time. But my career, I probably have 27 years of experience in the L&D space. I started my career working internally at GSK. For 10 years, I did every role you could possibly do in learning. So I did facilitator, manager, learning administration, instructional design, all of the core roles, and that is something I strongly encourage you to do. So making sure that you get enough exposure and trying out different roles is so important. But from there, and this is really what helped me become the CLO, was I went to the vendor side. And it's a very unusual pattern. We don't normally think about going to the vendor side. But when I moved from GSK to the vendor side, it was like going from high school football to the NFL. I mean, it is amazing. They have the expertise, they have the knowledge, they are just exceptional at what they do. Also, when you work on the vendor side, there's a lot of room for growth. There are so many different developmental positions. You may only have one training manager or one training director in a company, but you have 20 directors in a vendor side. So that really helped me. And on the vendor side, I got international experience and I got international experience. Sorry, I'm just drawing a blank here. International experience and also managing very large teams and working. I was only doing sales training at GSK. And so being able to do leadership training, manufacturing, R&D, whatever the function may be. So doing all those roles, I went to Biogen after I'd done 10 years on the vendor side and actually took a step back in my career. I really wanted to work at Biogen. They were my client. So I went from a VP to an associate director for manufacturing learning. And I'm going to be honest, there was a little hiccup when I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go from a VP to associate director. And I got great advice going in. Titles don't mean a thing. What matters is the scope and the responsibilities and the impact that you can make. So I really did. I went in as associate director. I was in that role for a year when the CLO unexpectedly took a job elsewhere. That's what I mean by luck. I applied for it and I was given it. And I really think the reason I beat out the competition was because of my vendor experience, because I had managed large budgets. I had the international experience, the multifunctional experience, and I think it just set me apart. So it's a very unusual career path. You don't normally see people go from client to vendor and then back out to client. So that's how I became CLO. Lengthy lengthy explanation, but yes.
Thank you, Anne. And I do see that we had a quick question about what does the vendor side mean? So we tend to think about folks as working internally within an L&D department or working externally, providing training services. Maybe it's technologies, maybe it's developing content, but partnering with the organization. So I think, Anne, you were saying that you were working for an organization that provided services to corporate L&D professional or L&D
Yes.
departments.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anne. Kristal, if you wouldn't mind telling us about your career path.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. Excited to be here with you all today. My career was a little bit different. I started out as a receptionist for a finance company in Redondo Beach, California, supporting the head of HR. And a lot of my work in that role, even though it was the daily administrative clerical work that you would imagine that comes with a receptionist, I had an opportunity to write a lot of SOPs for our general operations and just the functionality of our team, which was fun. Had a couple of other short stint administrative roles while I pursued my undergraduate and graduate degrees. I moved over into, I don't know if you all can see me, hear me. Okay. All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. I moved over into working for a property management company where I had an opportunity to do some training with our leasing consultant team. And at that time, I was frightened like crazy. I had no experience speaking in front of large groups from that capacity, but my regional vice president, who I reported into, thought I was great at it. So she encouraged me and pushed me. And then after I had created my that sort of short stint there in that capacity, had an opportunity to transition into higher ed and took a couple of roles as an adjunct faculty. When I say a couple of roles, I mean I taught at a couple of different colleges and universities. And I absolutely enjoyed it, fell in love with it, didn't realize how empowered I was as I empowered others through knowledge and education. And so that was a lot of fun to me. It also sharpened my facilitation skills, and it required me to really dive in and study what it is that I was presenting to become a true subject matter expert. I did that for about 10 years, and then I decided, just so happened that both of the colleges or universities that I taught at didn't have a tenured faculty system, which meant that I would have to continue to negotiate contracts year after year. And so I decided, while I love the absolute autonomy, it was a little challenging to determine if I wanted to hold on to the autonomy that I got working in higher ed, where I did get a chance to control my schedule a little bit more, or if I wanted to move into something that was a little bit more stable in terms of my income. And so I decided I was going to try to get the best of both worlds, where I could do training as well as have a structured pay set up. And so I moved into corporate training. And that was back in 2014. That's also where I found and fell in love with training industry. I was a team of one. I worked for a small nonprofit organization where I functioned similar to what Ann mentioned, doing all of the things as it related to corporate training. My first big major project in that role was to undo some of the damage that was done with the purchase of a previous learning management system. So that was quite interesting. If you'd like to hear about that story, we can connect afterwards. But it was a fun role. It gave me a lot of exposure to doing corporate-wide training design for a very small organization. It was about 400 employees for that organization, worked very closely with the CEO in that capacity. And then I had an opportunity to move into a manager of leadership development training role. I worked at Guitar Center. So my capacity for training, understanding around leadership development absolutely was stretched. I went from supporting an organization of 400 employees to about 11,000 at that time. And it was the ask of our senior leadership to create some universal leadership development training for some 2,000 leaders at that time. So we created a program called the Core 7, and that was pretty much based off of the core competencies or desires that came up in surveys and focus group conversations that I had with the senior leadership team. And it really was the true core of what they believe all leaders should know. So me and my team created this content, we wrote it out. Then we wrote out a high potential leadership development program, which gave me a lot of exposure and access to C-suite leaders. I also spent some time diving in and unpacking some of the HR related functionality. I've been fortunate enough to work under the HR umbrella throughout my corporate training career, which gave me a little bit more access to people data and analytics. And it was after about 10 months in this role where I got promoted to director of professional development and then director of organizational development, had a lot more of exposure to some of the employee engagement, performance management side of the house. And then I kind of took a break. I did some consulting for about a year. My family and I transitioned from Los Angeles, California to Las Vegas, Nevada. We were here for about a year. During that time, I did some consulting and I helped build the training brand for a university here, local university like Ann. I took a step back, about $75,000 pay cut. Most people thought I was crazy for that, but it was absolutely what I needed to do. And then about a year into that role, I got the invitation to come and interview for the Vice President of Employee Wellbeing role with Sweetwater, which I've been in that role now for going on 5 years. And that's pretty much been my path to how I've gotten there. Pretty unorthodox, but it's certainly been a diverse background that's led me to get to where I am today.
Thank you both. Kristal, that's so great. And Anne as well, it's not always a straight path, right? And I think both of your career journeys really demonstrate that we aren't going to necessarily just work our way straight up in a linear fashion, but instead there's going to be some twists and turns. So I love how adaptable you both kind of were in terms of being willing to take those twists and turns. My next question is about how you kind of were prepared for that role. So I'd love to hear more about the experience and skills that you had prior to moving into your executive positions that you think were most critical in preparing you for your CLO level position.
I'll jump in, Ann, if you don't mind. Um, First of all, shameless plug, earning my CPTM credential for training industry was absolutely helpful because while I was doing all of the things, I didn't necessarily have the language. I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know how to articulate it. The CPTM program actually provided tons of framework and thought processes around how to have conversations with stakeholders, how to navigate complexity when it comes to the business of training. And so it helped me to go from thinking like a facilitator to an actual business owner of a training unit or a miniature business within the business. And that was super helpful. And that really pushed me into developing these relationships with stakeholders within the organization so that I can understand more of the business. I had the training side down pat. I needed to understand how the business was functioning so that I can speak the language of the business. You're muted, Ann.
And you're on mute.
Just know that I said brilliant things to everyone. So sorry about that. I was trying to be respectful of Kristal, not have background noise. I think there's so many things that you can do today that can help you get ready for that CLO role. And I think one of them is, I agree with Kristal 100%, understanding the business. You know, so many times in learning, you think like you just need to know that learning request, but really the more you know about the industry, you know about the company, how does your company make money? Like what is the motivation for your company to actually be successful? Because you have to know that to be able to say, and here's how training is going to help us get there. So I think that's a big piece. The other piece is executive presence or influencing without authority. I did see one comment. Someone had said, I'm a female and I don't like wearing makeup and hair and heels. Do I have to do that? No, you do not have to do that. I have worked with many, many women that did not wear any makeup. So, I mean, yeah, I see that in the industry and the business all the time. So, no, there's no dress code. There's no appearance or apparel that's required. But executive presence is being able to sit down across from a senior leader and be able to articulate what you're trying to tell them very clearly and succinctly. And I think the only way you get that is practice. So continue to meet with the business, go out there, talk to leaders, you know, just even ask them, hey, can I get 20 minutes for a coffee break? Introduce yourself and then sit down and practice that, you know, how do I come across confident and how do I come across clear and succinct? But that's things you can work on today that would be invaluable when you become a CLO.
That is wonderful. Thank you both. Very thoughtful answers. I want to fast forward a bit to you're stepping into that executive role. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what maybe surprised you most about the role once you got there. And if you could share a little bit about what kind of your challenges were moving into that role.
Yeah, I'll go first this time, Kristal, if you don't mind. When I got into the CLO role, we had just become a centralized learning organization. So prior to that, you had your functional learning. So manufacturing sat in manufacturing, R&D sat in R&D. And I actually helped as a vendor, being on the services side, sell the idea of becoming centralized. So when I became CLO, we had this centralized organization, but they didn't do anything. Like all they did is change the reporting lines, and they didn't really change how you're going to do business. Where are the efficiencies from centralized services? How do you stop the duplication of effort? And so for me stepping in, I had a lot of people that were not happy to be working in HR. They wanted to be back out in the business where they were, as well as a lot of leaders that got promoted because, oh, you're really good scientist, so you'd be a great training manager. That's my pet peeve. That does not mean anything. There's so many people out there that think, oh, anybody can do training, and that is absolutely not true. So working with a team that probably didn't have that skill level, some that didn't have that skill level that they needed, as well as unifying across the board. And I think the other biggest challenge I had was consistently communicating to the business why we needed the funding, why we needed the headcount. Because in the industry that I was in, this is biotechnology, every year your budget got smaller, every year your headcount got smaller. So it was constantly making sure, did the CEO know what we were doing, what value, and how can I phrase it to be able to say, hey, this program we've checked, we have more retention for employees that went through this program than didn't go through it. So any way that you can take training and tie it to a dollar or tie it to a benefit or a business goal is so important. So I think those are a couple of things, and I'll stop here.
Yeah, for me, and I think those are really good points of being able to tie it to the dollar amount. I think for me, mine is a bit more personable. So for me, it was I enjoy doing a lot of the day-to-day functionality. So the training, the curriculum design, and all of the fun stuff that goes into actually all of the mechanics associated with training. You really transition more to a strategic role. So you're not in the day-to-day of doing the work every single day. And sometimes a challenge can come with having to share the glory for work that you've done or you're used to doing. And as you tend to stand up more team members so that they can start getting the spotlight for some of the work. And so that may mean spending a little extra time training folks or making sure you're hiring training team members who already have skills in the area that you need. I think the other pivotal or challenging moment for me was the long sacrifices of time. And Amy mentioned it during some of the slides that she was presenting before we went into the panel piece, but it really is long, long hours being in an executive role. And if you are trying to build family and career, I spent a lot of time away from my family for the sake of investing in my career and moving up that path. And while I don't regret it, I had to learn how to find balance really quick because I realized that that just wasn't going to be sustainable for me.
That is really great feedback. Thank you, both for those pieces of kind of surprises and challenges. I am going to move to my next question, which is about the context. How did the structure, the size of your organization kind of impact the responsibilities and your path to leadership? I've seen a number of questions in the chat and on the Q&A related to how size impacts and what the structure looks like. So would love to hear from you all what that impact was for you.
I'll try this one first, Kristal. So I think the impact of the size really does make a big difference, because if you want to be promoted, if you want to have a career steps to move through, when you have a larger organization, it's similar to the org chart that Amy was showing. There's a lot more room for people to be able to move up. But the other pieces I would say is lateral as well. So our training team, when I was at Biogen, I think we had maybe 74 people. It was a relatively large team, and there was a lot of room to be able to get promoted. A lot of roles had different levels, so you could start as associate director and go into a director. But I do think the size of the company is critical, and there are ratios, and I can't think of what it is, but like how many training people do you need per employee? So I don't know if it's 1,000 employees and one training person. That can't be possibly right. But whatever that ratio is, that's something really good. You can Google that pretty quick. And it helps substantiate, hey, we do need more headcount. We have 500 employees and we have one trainer, something along those lines. So I would say use some leverage what you can find out on the internet. But yeah, size will matter about the size of your department.
And I would add that for my specific situations, it wasn't necessarily about the size or the levels of within the organizations. I was, I guess, fortunate enough to have what the organization needed at the time. And so when it came to my role at Sweetwater, for example, our organization exploded over COVID when most organizations were actually shutting down because we had a business model to sell our products online anyway. And so our customer base grew, our employee population grew, and there was an immediate need to do some structured manager development, for example. Well, that came out of also we have a desire to truly create a learning culture. And so I had to identify what the company valued, which was their core values. They really believe that over the last 40 something years that we have been in existence, that it's the core values of our organization that has gotten us as far as we've gotten. And it truly was the DNA to the success of our company. And so I started building competencies that align with those values so that we can apply them every single day. And that is what helped and continues to help build a learning culture, which made a lot of what I had to bring to the organization much more acceptable.
That's great. Thank you both for explaining the context. Kristal, I have a follow-up question because you were the Senior Vice President of HR. I wonder how that experience as an HR executive influenced your approach to leading L&D.
Yes, that's a really good question. It gave me a lot of influence and a lot of opportunity to bridge gaps. So oftentimes, many businesses, particularly in retail, can be focused on the sale a lot. So oftentimes we're looking at metrics associated with customer satisfaction, revenue, all of that fun stuff. For me, I had an opportunity to bring a little bit more exposure to the people analytics side of things. Well, we probably aren't hitting some of our sales metrics because of the way some of our folks are performing. So let's look at some of the data that's going to give us a little bit more insight, like employee engagement surveys, exit interviews, and then having that seat in HR, I had an opportunity to share more of that information in a meaningful way to our stakeholders where it made sense. It was almost like a, duh, why didn't we think of that? The other piece was really leaning into I was on the side of the coin where I was used to presenting the business case for why we needed to do certain training, but then this SVP role, because I was responsible for sort of championing and gardening the corporate-wide training so that we didn't do anything that was not in alignment with our business goals. I had to find a way to not just say no to business cases that were being presented to me for training, but more so, it wasn't about saying no, it was more about protecting the yes. We want to reserve our resources for those business needs that really, really do require training. And so it wasn't that I would just give a no or reject a particular response. It was more, let me explain why. And because I had the L&D side, I can explain it with empathy. People understood why, and it just totally made sense. And where it made sense, we find ways to implement that training somewhere in our roadmap. But if it didn't align, I was sort of the gatekeeper to help share out that info.
Yeah, I've seen in the chat, Kristal, I love that. Protect the yes. I've never heard it phrased that way, but oh my gosh, that's dead on perfect.
Thank you.
I agree. Yes. Great insight. Thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question of the panel, and then we are going to open it up to audience questions. For both of you, what's one piece of advice that you would give to someone aspiring to that executive level role?
I'll kick this one off, Ann, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I think it's a matter of really understanding the power of relationship currency. That's been like golden throughout my consistent path to executive leadership. And I think in individual contributor roles or lower level roles, we spend a lot of time building performance currency, meaning we'll go above and beyond, even as an order taker early in our training career. Maybe it's about adding a cherry on top so that we get that recognition, we get that validation, we build credibility with the organization. But as I've grown in my career, I've learned to shift that to, it's not so much about the performance currency, because after a while that can depreciate. And what I mean by that is you can do so well at all of the things, and the first time you do something wrong, now all of a sudden, you have those eyebrows being raised, or uh, or if you just miss the mark in general. Or people tend to say, well, you know what, Ann is always going to do a great job. That's just who she is, right? So now after a while, familiarity starts breeding contempt. For me, it's been more, if I continue to build those relationships, not only have I built in a buffer to, if I do miss the mark, I have those relationships that will help bridge some of those gaps. But then it's also about creating that strategic alignment before there's even a training need. I regularly meet with my senior leaders just to tap in. Hey, how's it going? How you doing? When I'm on campus, we do bump fists, or hey, can we check in for coffee just for the next 10, 15 minutes? I just want to know what's going on in your world and how I can help. That's helped me a ton.
Yeah, tons of wisdom there. I agree so much as far as the relationships and how important that is. And that's something you can start doing today. It's not something you have to wait until you're in a different role. A couple other things. Oh, no, you said one thing, so let me step back. The one thing I would recommend is there's a saying of whether you're looking through the mirror or you're looking at the mirror or looking through the window. And I don't know who I heard that from recently, but to be a CLO, you need to be looking through the window. You need to be looking outside of the organization. You need to, attend seminars like this. So you're doing exactly what you should be doing today. But really being able to understand what's going on in your industry, what's going on within learning. Everybody's talking about AI, so hope that, get interested in that and see how that can help you and be more efficient. But, if you're looking at the mirror and you're only looking internally at your organization, that's going to be a disadvantage. So I think one thing to prepare to be that CLO is, take that time, find the time to develop yourself. And I know I was the worst one at it. So I will admit, I wish in my career I had taken more time just to develop myself. And so I would strongly encourage developing yourself and doing external events like this. And there's so many areas that you can go to. I know that just training industry alone has tons of webinars and things and articles, but look through that window would be my challenge to you.
I love that. It is really important to stay on top of industry trends and make sure that we are not looking so micro and siloed in our own organization. So we have so many amazing questions that have come in from the audience. I'm going to try to get through as many as we can. First, I'm going to ask you guys if you might, Anita asked, what does a CLO do on a day-to-day basis? We also had another one related to what extent are you involved in the development and delivery in that CLO role? So I don't know if both or one of you want to provide an answer on that.
Yeah, I'll jump in if you don't mind, Kristal. And then you can always add. I think, one thing I missed most when I became a CLO was I didn't get into the weeds anymore. So I wasn't, being a solution architect. I wasn't creating content. I wasn't facilitating. So I think when you get to that role, it is so much more about relationships. So I think back when I was a CLO, my day varied incredibly, but it was leading a large team. It was having a vision for our learning team, making sure that everybody in that population of 70 plus employees understood what we were for, why we were doing it. The biggest part was meeting with the business. I spent more time meeting with the business, meeting with the CEO, the executive vice presidents, so that they could really understand the value and who we are. So I think a lot of it is public relations. And then a lot of it is strategy. And I think it's really taking that step back, not looking at individual programs or even individual functions like R&D training, but really looking at what do we want to do in this company and what does learning mean here and what can we do? So I think you've got to come up with that, articulate it, motivate your team, get them behind it. And then, of course, you're always going to get the call. CEO said, well, why was I assigned this training? I don't know, sir, but I'll find out and I'll get right back to you. So there's also, you're kind of a help desk to the executive team as well. But it's a fun job. It is such a fun job. I enjoyed it so much. I would encourage any of you guys to try for that role.
Yeah, I'd echo every single word that Ann spoke. I would add also from the day-to-day responsibilities. We've talked a lot about those during our conversation here today. But most importantly, if this is where you aspire to be, show up with confidence. The last thing you want to do is show up feeling like an imposter. And some of that can be prevented just by doing the work, like studying, becoming a student of your craft with all of these things, and really leaning in to understand what are some of those business challenges and knowing that you don't have to solve them alone. That's where that relationship currency comes back in. How about, creating opportunities where you can have conversations, meaningful conversations to understand what the challenges are, and creating brainstorming sessions or just, informal dialogue around problem solving. I do a lot of problem solving with the business in the actual training that I'm facilitating or that I get an opportunity to design or at least speak into. So if we know specifically that there's some challenges in the business, hey, let's make it a case study and let's challenge our folks who are also grooming to be leaders with coming up with a solution.
That is really helpful to think through what that day-to-day looks like. So thank you both. We've had a number of questions related to degree, to the extent that a degree is required in this role. I know, Kristal, you mentioned a certification. I will add a piece of training industry research, and then if the two of you have anything else to add, we do find that individuals in these executive level roles tend to have some form of graduate education, whether it be a master's or a PhD or an MBA. That does tend to be more likely in the role.
Yep, I would agree. I have a master's in education and got it very early in my career, which was perfect timing in hindsight. But you do normally see some type of graduate studies or something like that. I do see a lot of doctors like Kristal here as well.
Yeah, and I thought for a while that I was going to be in higher ed. That was one of the primary reasons why I pursued my doctorate. You absolutely don't need one to achieve CLO status within your organization, but I too would agree. It helps that if you have some form of graduate education, it just helps you understand the business more.
Yep, I agree.
That's great. I have a question from Anita. She mentioned that kind of what I was presenting on the CLO sounds like a profile of any executive, and she's wondering what makes a learning officer different from other members of the C-suite.
Really good question, Anita.
Yeah.
I was in a very interesting conversation with a couple of learning professionals a couple of weeks ago, and we debated on, does your CLO need to have any experience in learning? And while most people would say, yeah, of course, duh, I actually would challenge that. And I think if you had a CLO, or at least by title, of someone who was very ingrained in the culture, the business, and they can truly serve as your SME, that CLO can actually position a team around them that has the expertise to do all of the L&D functionality. And so I know we're getting pretty close to time. I don't want to drag that on, but it's just something to think about, because one of the challenges that if you did come up through the traditional training rank, one of the challenges is acquiring that business acumen just for the business in general. And so if you have someone on your team, especially someone who sits in a leadership role with that level of influence, it's not a bad setup.
That's great. I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to go with the 3 books. So can you each recommend 3 books, or maybe to keep it shorter, 1 or 2, that you've read that really impacted your career?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think one of them, and I've just recently read it again, is Atomic Habits. So if you haven't read that, and I can't think of who the author is, but it is a great book, and it really teaches you how to build in and ingrain habits that you need to do, and it's stacking habits, and it's really good. It helps you be more proficient and efficient, I think.
Yeah, I got that book on my bookshelf right now. And for me, it's, believe it or not, the ATD handbook it's like a thick reference book, like with a combination of a bunch of thought leaders who and learning specialists and learning leaders who have built programs from leadership development, onboarding training, culture type training, diversity training. It's just a compilation of a lot of good best practices that I've had it now for almost 7, 8 years now. And I think there's even another edition out later than that, but it has been extremely helpful for me.
Wonderful. Well, I will add a book recommendation and then I will hand it back to Liz. I would recommend What Makes a Great Training Organization. It was written by our founder, Doug Harward, and CEO, and it does take the compilation of over a decade of research to say what are the process capabilities that are necessary for a high-performing training organization.
Yes, and with that, we are out of time. Is there anything else you would ladies like to say before we kind of take it away and say our goodbyes and give some other shout out to some goodies we have here at Training Industry?
I would just thank everybody for attending, giving up an hour of your very busy day to be here. So I hope you got some enjoyment out of it and learned something new, but thank you for being here.
Echo, same exact words. Thank you so much. I popped my LinkedIn profile link in the chat and did the same thing. If you'd like to connect with us afterwards, please feel free to do so.
Yes, ma'am. I will be doing so as well. So I think everybody else should be, because these are such powerful women, so inspiring, so encouraging. I've thoroughly enjoyed this webinar and I hope everyone else has as well. And additionally to the plugs, we do have some more up and coming training industry webinars this month. You can register for these programs and watch past webinars now at trainingindustry.com. And all of our webinars are pre-qualified for a credit hour by HRCI, SHRM, ISPI, and CPTM. Send an email to me or anybody on the TI team and we will give you those codes. If you're like, what is CPTM, Liz? It is the Certified Professional and Training Management Program that assists you in developing core competencies that will empower you to manage the future training needs of your organization. So you can find more information at trainingindustry.com/training. And I would also love to see you all in Milwaukee this fall for the 2025 Training Industry Strategy Summit. We are going to collaborate with peers, industry experts, and thought leaders as you build, refine, and future-proof your organizational learning strategies. This is more than a conference. It is essentially a working session for learning leaders who want to align learning with business outcomes. So our early bird savings is available through July 31st, and you can learn more at summit.trainingindustry.com. And then lastly, that evaluation survey should have popped open another tab in your browser, and we appreciate to hear your feedback from today's session. Thank you again to our amazing panelists, Amy, Kristal, and Ann. This was such an amazing session. But I again thank you all for your time and attention today. I hope to see you next time. Have a wonderful week, have a wonderful day, and I will see you all soon. Bye, everybody.